Verse 21, Ehud reaches with his left hand, takes the sword from his right thigh. Eglon wasn't even suspecting it, and he thrust it into his belly. And the hilt or the handle also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he didn't pull out the sword of his belly. Because of his size, he couldn't fight back as easily. He was pretty slow. It makes me think of the things of the world, the lust of the flesh, or things that feel good to you, that you want, lust of the eyes, everything you see you have to have, and the pride of life. I feel like Eglon, king of Moab, is representing 1 John 2:16 when we read about the things of the world. And like us, when we start bringing in the things of the world into our life, it starts weighing on us like the fat of this man did. It starts weighing on us. And when we harbor that sin in our lives, it slows us down and it hinders our fight against the enemy. We are helpless when we're weighted down with our sin. In fact, the enemy would prefer us to be weighted down with our sin so that we can't fight back. We've got to be able to stand in the presence of God, shed that sin, release that sin, come to Jesus and ask for forgiveness. Because of what he did on the cross, he's able to do that for us. In verse 22, the handle went in after the blade, the fat closed over the blade, and he didn't pull the sword out. And there's something in the ESV version that I'm reading from. It's not in the NIV, but this says, and the dung came out. I want to talk about this for a second, because this king who was so luxurious, who prided himself on the finest foods, the finest clothes, the finest friends, the finest, cool roof chambers. This king now is being reduced to the lowest form of shame and disgrace. He had everything he wanted, and he took great care to make sure that his body, his creature comforts, if you will, were satisfied. And now in his death, he's covered in dung. And when his attendants come in and they see this, I'm pretty sure word got around of this great king of Moab, who was so luxurious, who had everything he wanted, is now covered in dung. That's a story that gets out. And this is what sin does to us. It covers us. If we don't wash it away with the blood of Jesus, it covers us and it ruins us. Continuing in verse 23, then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked them. And the way locks worked on these doors is, from the inside, you could easily get out. You didn't need a key to get out. You just walked out. And when the door shut behind you, it locked. You needed a key to get in. And this is just showing us that Ehud finished his task. It was done. This is exactly the way he wanted it to be. He completed it exactly the way God had instructed him in his heart, and he didn't even look back. He left with God's confidence. He just ran right out. Verse 24, when he had gone, the servants came, and when they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, well, surely he is relieving himself in the closet of the cool of the chamber. And they waited till they were embarrassed. But when he still did not open the doors of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened the door. And there lay their Lord dead on the floor, might I add, covered in his dung, from verse 22. Now, because the servants and the attendants and the guards for Eglon were used to kind of leaving him alone, giving him his privacy, they didn't check on him for a while. And because they didn't check on him for a while, this allowed Ehud to get away. Verse 26, Ehud escaped while they delayed, and he passed beyond the idols, and he escaped to Sirah. And when he arrived, he sounded the trumpet. This is a jubilee trumpet, a celebration trumpet. He sounded the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim. Then the people of Israel went down with him from the hill country, and he was their leader. Ehud had helped Israel walk out of their oppression. This was a joyful time for Israel, and Ehud is now their leader. Verse 28, he said to them, follow after me. This is God's confidence. This is God's courage for someone to just walk right out and say, follow me. Let's do this. For the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. How inclusive, too, he is. He's not saying he's given it into my hand. He's including everybody. Such a great leader. So they went down after him and seized the fords of the Jordan against the Moabites and did not allow anyone to pass over. So what they're doing is they're going and they're surrounding the Moabites now. They're now enclosing them in. It's kind of like they're trapping them. And so what they do at this time is they gather an army together and they kill 10,000 of the Moabites. Verse 29, they killed at that time about 10,000 of the Moabites, all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest for 80 years. Now, I know this was in previous studies, but if we could just notice the numbers here. I want us to look at verse 11. The land had rest 40 years. And now we look at verse 30, they have rest for 80 years. Isn't it just like God to multiply our rest when we are in his presence, obeying him, following him? And as Ehud said, follow me. This is what God is saying. I almost hear Jesus saying this, follow me, when he's calling his first disciples. And then again we see, come to me and I'll give you rest. In Matthew 11, he says, come to me. This is like, I hear Jesus saying this. And as a result of this, God multiplies, he doubles their rest. And so now to finish this chapter off, we have one last verse. Verse 31, after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. So he's not coming after Ehud, he's serving at the same time as Ehud. And where he is serving is in the land of the Philistines. Now at this time, the Philistines were a fierce group of people, and they had such little disregard for anyone else that they would make these little secret paths along the main road, and they would just lie and wait for travelers to come by, and then they'd jump on them and they'd steal from them, they would kill them, do whatever else they were going to do. They were a fierce group of people. Shamgar, we see, killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Now an ox goad, I was reading that it's either the plowshare, when you're out in the fields and you're plowing by hand, it's either that front part of the plow where the blade is, or I also read that it could have been an 8 to 10 foot stick that had a sharp tip on it, and they would use it to move the oxen. So it could be one of those two. Either way, Shamgar is most likely in this field, and he's plowing with his oxen, and he sees these Philistines waiting for someone to pass by on the road, and he gets so angry, that righteous anger, and the Lord fills him up with so much strength that in his anger he is able to kill 600 of these Philistines with his ox goad. Either that long stick with a sharp tip, or it's the blade at the front of the plow. God put it in his heart to take them on. This impulse would have been so strong and his adrenaline pumping so hard that he destroys these Philistines. He takes 600 of them out just like that. And he wasn't hurt. He had no weapon. He had no army. He used what was in his hand. This is showing us God's character. He doesn't need you to fight with a whole army. He doesn't need to give you fancy weapons. He's asking you to use what you have in your hand right now. The talents that you have, the abilities that you have, those feelings in your heart that you have, the love that you have for other people. He's asking you to use that. Shamgar had a love for his people, and he was getting angry that the Philistines kept taking advantage of his people. He was fed up, and he used what was in his hand to take out 600 strong Philistines. These guys were the strongest guys around, and he saves Israel. What we can learn here is that God can use even the most unlikely, the weakest person, someone who has no apparent weapon. God uses that person because he knows that that person is going to rely on God for his strength. When we use what's in our hand right now, and we couple that with God's strength, we can see the victory, but it doesn't stop there. We don't take the credit for the victory. God receives the victory. When God uses someone like Shamgar, who has an ox goad in his hand to destroy 600 strong Philistines who have weapons, and Shamgar walks away from that unhurt, Shamgar would have been a fool to assume that he did any of that in his own strength. It was because God was pulsing through him that he was able to do this. And for us, we can be an unstoppable force if we use what God has given us. It's really easy to look at other people and say, I wish I had that talent. I wish I had that ability. I wish I had that gift. Then I could do that too. And God says, no, I've given you everything you need. You just need to rely on me. Man, that is an unstoppable individual. And all I know is after reading this, I want to be like that. I want to use what God has given me. I don't want to look around to see what everybody else has and wish that I had it better or wish that I had more. I want to use what God has given me, and I want to see victory in my life.